All right, let's go. All right, let's go.
Well, let's get started. Danny Loe, thank you so much for coming on an episode of Ship Talkers with me. I know you're a busy guy. Last time we caught up was at the ULTL event, which I thought was pretty awesome. I love Todd and his spiel on everything, got the whole group fired up, but it was nice to connect with you again. And thank you for coming on to the show, man.
Yeah, glad to be here. Good to see you again. Enjoyed seeing you there in the North Carolina area. We may get into my travel woes before we get off the show today, but that was quite an experience getting there that day.
Yeah. Well, I am personally not traveling right now because of the World Cup stuff going on. I want nothing to do with that heat out there. Like, everybody enjoy, all the folks in here from around the world enjoying soccer, but I want nothing to do with airports right now.
Yeah. Last week I had some travel. I think my shortest delay was 3 hours. So yeah, it just tells you how it's going.
Yeah. So, Danny, obviously a lot of people probably know you or have relationships with you from your time at, the big the ArcBest folks where, you had a wonderful career over there, but you've kind of since stepped out of, the W-2 environment and you're going out on your own and, such as SOARS. And so I would love to kind of hear about what your new endeavors are now, because obviously you've been pretty intimate with the LTL industry, both good and bad, and you recognized or saw there was spots that you could optimize and help shippers and carriers get to a much better environment with, figuring out how to use all this data a little better and figuring out how to optimize networks. So kind of tell me about, what you're doing at SOARS now, and let's peel the onion back a little bit.
Sure. So I guess it would have been in late 24, early 25, I founded SOARS, which kind of is a backronym. It stands for Strategic Optimized Revenue Solutions, but it's also the Greek god of luck. So that was kind of how we backed into the name. But it's a focus, kind of what you said, with 26, 27 years more in the space, we're still doing a lot of things the same way at LTL that we did them, back in the 60s and 70s. And so I think there's a huge opportunity. And I spent some time just talking to some of the other carriers, some of my peers and at different spots. And all the carriers have this frustration about, and to be honest, shippers do too, that there just seems to be a disconnect from the pricing, kind of legacy pricing, to quoting, to invoices, what you get, all the changes and the different pieces of it. And then tie that back to me, the world changed quite a bit. When TMSs became available to not just the Fortune 50 or the Fortune 100, and MyCarrier is a big part of that. They were, we had a relationship back previously where I worked with you guys when I was working with ABF and ArcBest. And so I think you really brought this technology, this ability to make transactions easier to not just the on-premise TMS that most of the shippers out there couldn't afford to do. You now made it available to them. And so then that, to me, opened doors that carriers really need to do things differently than they did in the past. Yeah. We could argue about NFC if it has a place or doesn't have a place. I just know that there's a world that transactional pricing, transactional shipments are happening, and it's growing at a much faster rate than really anything else in the LTL space. Yeah. And that is where shippers are deciding on each shipment how they want to route a shipment. Most carriers are still stuck in, let's sign a 1-year agreement, let me put it in my tariff. I'm going to hope the averages of your shipment weights and your destinations and what you told me your profile is, that's going to work out for me. Yeah. And in some cases that may have to be, if you're an extremely large shipper, there's probably but you also have better data than some of the smaller shippers. So my view in the conversation with the carriers, there's multiple ways to do this. One, you shouldn't, in a transactional world, you should never lose money on a shipment. If you're telling me this is going from point A to point B, it weighs this much, it takes up this much space, I should know how to price that freight. Now, you can't say the same if I came up with a program that lasts for a year and it's designed to cover any shipment from point A and point B in the country, and it could be ping pong balls, it could be steel. You've thrown me FAKs that I have to go through and everything else. That is a recipe for an unprofitable shipment. In some cases, maybe in the overall average works out for a carrier, but why are we subsidizing some shipments with other shipments in those cases? And so, just this visibility of data, not from just the shipper, but also from the carrier about their network. What do they need? What's the capacity in the network? Where are lanes? You go back to, other things that happen, just the ability to, I go back to the Baltimore Bridge, type scenario. Carriers couldn't change the routings. They really couldn't change the price. They couldn't do anything to stop freight flowing into their network when you have a tariff and a legacy static pricing program too. But you at least have some flexibility in your network if you have these transactional shipments, and one can either price it that meets the new reality that their costs have changed for that area, or two, just not price it, or so that you can get your network caught up in different areas, or to be able to rebuild and kind of get your network back in sync. There's a significant cost to carriers when networks are not in sync.
Oh, 100%. Head haul, back haul, and those nuances change, right? There's some states like Florida, which are typically always in an inbound state, not necessarily an outbound state, and everybody's hungry for that. But there's a lot of dynamics with customer attrition or new accounts, industries coming on that change the balance of networks, right? Yes. And I always had this analogy with LTL. It's a big boat, but a tiny rudder. Right? Doesn't turn or steer fast, but I think it's fair to say over the last couple years, and I think here well into the future, we're seeing more significant change happen in what I feel is a positive way for the industry that I've been begging for, right? Probably for the last 20 years. What do you think are some of the bigger drivers of that now all of a sudden that's like opening eyes or like changing that?
Yeah, I think technology is a piece. I go back to the SaaS TMS, just the ability for the lower level, the SMBs, to be able to have that technology to interact with carriers. And now, once you started seeing that, you start seeing carriers then start building things around that view for the SMBs, which to me is a great thing.
Yes.
And for carriers, typically carriers can be more profitable with SMBs than they can with the large, enterprise type customers, type deal. So, I think you've heard an XPO talk about a focus on the SMBs. I think other carriers. So I think it's a combination of technology, and it's a combination that carriers know that with some focus and some investment around this, that they can go find some more profitable shipments than they had before, and shipments that maybe fit their network better, not just profit, but just even if you don't look at profitability in the perfect way, sometimes from a profit standpoint, it may not look right, but it's really taking up a lot of the fixed costs of the network. And it depends on who the carrier is and how they view that, to how they view profitability within that. But if you put a shipment in a backhaul lane where you are going to run empty, it's a benefit to your network.
Yes. And for me, I think one of the biggest drivers that's allowing this change, like to kind of unpack what you said, more shippers in the SMB network are able to get their hands on more sophisticated tools when it comes to routing and comparing kind of apples to apples to make better decisions, right? And I think one of the caveats of having business centralized on a single system is you somewhat are able to normalize the data and what gets transferred to the LTL carrier. So now I think there's an environment created where the carrier now has better data sets to help balance that network out. And I think that's where you come into play to help kind of be a catalyst or driver of that change. And I don't think people realize that it doesn't just benefit the carrier, it benefits the shipper too.
Yeah. My whole view is, not just working in an LTL world. I worked in a kind of asset light world and a managed transportation, different pieces of it. Our conversation with the customer back when I would talk with the customer is like, you're not going to procure your way to a lower cost over an extended period of time. You may win in 1 year, but what's going to happen is if you procure in a way that the carrier is not profitable, they're going to come back and get their profit with it. So the focus should be is how do we take costs out? How do we become more efficient? I think on the front end, the data, what MyCarrier is doing and other things is making it much more efficient on the administrative piece of it. I think the visibility of data and then carriers looking and knowing how it fits that network then adds efficiency to the carriers, and both are happy. And so, that's the happy medium there is when both parties win. That's when I think kind of what you described too. That's why we're seeing more buy-in to be able to do that. And so just, we're starting to build a pretty good team here, not just of employees that work, but we also have some advisors that are kind of legends in the industry. Yep. And we're having these conversations with the carriers and kind of helping them take that step forward and see how transactional, working more in this SMB space and how to work it can really add profitability to their networks.
Yeah. Well, I think you've built a heck of a team and made some headway in a very short amount of time. And, you know, I know one of those advisors and they were a big mentor to me. So I know that you got a good team over there. But let's kind of talk about maybe some of the pricing trends you're seeing change over the last couple of years. I've definitely seen more folks centered around like a density type or dynamic style pricing, particularly for the SMB. I don't think they've figured out how to bridge the gap and deploy this into the Fortune 500 marketplace yet.
Right.
You know, that's still very tariff FAK driven because I think those shippers have figured out how to work the game, if you will, in that segment of the industry. But you said something that kind of made my ears perk up is there's a huge focus on the SMB market again, where I think in the past, they've kind of let that live with like the transactional 3PL market, but there's a huge focus for that again. And in my opinion, I think in a very near term, we're going to see like what I call price neutrality with the intermediary versus what the local rep could offer the customer. And it's up to the intermediaries to change their value prop a little bit, because I think there will be some like pricing neutrality with what the customer can get from an intermediary versus their local rep, right? Except for that intermediary has to mark up, or they have to figure out how to change the value prop to the customer, just like we saw in the travel industry, right? Kayak and Booking.coms aren't out of business, but they change their value prop. You can't get a Delta flight cheaper with them than you can on their own website now, right? So I definitely see that happening. Let's talk about some of that you're seeing with like dynamic style pricing really start to take hold and more of an appetite from the LTL carrier to want to figure this out.
Yeah, we've had a lot of conversations with carriers about whether you want to call it dynamic pricing, instantaneous pricing, it's the ability to respond in milliseconds to a quote that comes in and give a smart, intelligent quote that meets that fits what that shipment details are. Yeah. And so that can come in many different forms. You know, there's a lot of there's some carriers that are doing some rules based. There's carriers that are doing dynamic pricing that are using tariffs in the background. My view of that is they're putting lipstick on a pig, right? In other words, they're still using things that don't make sense, but they're taking steps to move forward, to progress within that. But, you know, our view of the world is that, you know, we have built models for each of our customers to do this. And so the beauty of it, it's built from scratch each time. Now, granted, we have a lot of knowledge that we can move faster really than anyone else to do it. I would say our team has more experience with dynamic pricing than anyone in the industry. And so the ability to work carriers through how they want to do it. And what we tell them is like, dynamic pricing is just a tool. You know, each carrier is going to use dynamic pricing in a different way. It may be that they just want to use it to work on network capacity. Some may want to use it to help make sure that they're not losing money on some of these transactional shipments because they have a tariff to do it. But I 100% agree with you. There's a change that's going on in the industry with regard to SMBs and how they connect. Because let's go back 15 years ago. 3PLs, a lot of them became very they grew very fast in the LTL space because they were very aggressive. Two, they would go call, you know, they were a phone call away, not a sales rep in a car driving to go see a guy that's got 5 shipments a week, you know, type deal. And they would give him a price immediately. You know, the world's changed. I think some carriers have gotten better about being able to provide a price quickly. Dynamic pricing allows you to do that, right? In other words, if you have an account set up with a carrier that has dynamic pricing, they should be able to give you a price immediately. So the salesperson is there. He's working through it. The customer is showing interest. Hey, here's your price. You know, and so I think all that works. So then if you turn that, what does that mean then for the intermediaries that you said? You're right. They've got to create value differently than they were before to be able to have the margin difference to do that. And there's some that do a really good job of that. And there's others that don't. And so I think that market will sort itself out. But I think the more that carriers develop dynamic pricing, and whether it's through direct to the carrier through APIs or whether it's through platforms like MyCarrier or others, they're going to get access to these carriers that they don't have to go through an intermediary to do that. Yeah.
No, I agree with you there. I want to talk about some of the ancillary benefits that I think the dynamic style pricing brings to the market. And one of the biggest ones for me is I've never been in love with the LTL onboarding process, right? Because of what you just mentioned. You got to get in there. Oh, well, I need some data, right? And like the customer's like, well, here's some invoices, here's a couple bill ladings, but you have to recognize they don't have a central repository, thus they can't give you data, thus you can't give them a good price. And how many times have you seen where the first pencil on a pricing sheet is really incomplete because it was done with a myopic view or assumptions, and now we've really created a less than desirable customer experience when presenting rates, and it's not aligning with your network. And I think that's something you're trying to solve.
Yeah, correct. I mean, if you build the models that are tied into the network, it's tied into the cost of the carrier, it's tied into what the carrier wants and needs. You're quoting one shipment. I'm not quoting an average. When you send me the API, or you send the API to a carrier that participates with us, we know the origin, we know the destination, we know the cube, and we know the weight. And we know if you have some delivery accessorials or different things. Honestly, where I hope the next step is we start getting addresses, because that makes a difference to the carrier, type deal. Precision is better. But you give us that to a carrier, they can come back and, again, provide that intelligent quote to you.
Yes.
And so I just think that's different. And so then to me, the piece about onboarding a customer is really about getting it loaded in your system, and do they have credit? The rest takes care of itself. I think, some people they used to be called briefcase pricing, right? And those were kind of rack rates the carriers, a salesperson may have a walk-in and
courtesy discount.
Yes. But what good is a courtesy discount if what your freight is so much different than my freight? It doesn't make sense. You're trying to normalize something that shouldn't be normalized, and you don't have to. And that's the reason, again, the technology of API calls for each shipment allows the carrier to give you the best price for each one of those shipments.
Now here's another thing, and I'm curious to get your thought on this, because I saw this a lot. At MyCarrier, we sit on a lot of source data. We see a lot of things happen. And I think one of the things I don't like about that kind of tariff style FAK or class-based pricing is that pricing can also expire. I have not seen that ever happen with dynamic pricing. And what happens is, if you're not rationalizing that and your rep's not on top of it, that pricing expires. It goes back to courtesy discount. That poor customer runs a rate from like Dallas to Florida, and they see a rate of like $3,500. And like on the screen, that basically says, F you, I don't want your business. And they don't understand why. So I think that's another big thing, right? That you can tackle by moving or helping them move to this style of pricing.
Yeah, that's how all carriers should start looking at how many, and again, they're called rate estimates, right? In other words, they don't do quotes because the quote doesn't apply. So they do a rate estimate that goes and hits the carrier's rating system that says, okay, it's from this origin, here's your rate base, here's your line of rates, here's the discount, here's the things that apply, and this is going to lead into the next thing here. So then I'm going to give you a rate per hundredweight with a discount that then applies to that shipment. Well, guess what? One, you put 1,000 pounds with 3 zeros on there because you didn't know how much it weighed yet, and it comes back at 11, 12. Guess what? Your quote's not going to match, or your estimate's not going to match your invoice. Second, and again, we're kind of getting into this. We can dive further. Most carriers' costs are not really predicated by weight anymore. Yes, weight has a factor into it.
This drives me nuts. Is like you have a pricing model that is trying to weigh out a trailer, but your real goal is to cube it out to maximize your revenue.
Yes.
And it's like me putting the square in the circle hole trying to shove it in there.
Yeah, and maybe there's carriers out there. I firmly believe most carriers are probably cubing out their trailers. I don't know if it's the high 80s or 90% of the time as compared to weighting out a trailer. It's just the world's changed. Most things are made of plastic. Now, granted, we go pick up batteries, and maybe that's different, but in most cases, it is about how much space that shipment's going to take up in the trailer. And my rate, if in the legacy world, as a carrier, my rate mechanism, my trigger is based off of rate per 100 pounds.
Yes.
And so obviously you get it reweighed, it's going to change. And again, carriers still may change a dynamic quote if it gets reweighed, it changed. But they have the option to decide what to do. If you looked at it and it was 1,000 pound shipment and it came in at 1,100 pounds, but this cube was actually still the same as what they told you, and your costs were driven off cube,
Yeah.
It's your choice. Do you want to honor the quote or not? In the other world, it doesn't matter. It goes to get back to the same rating system. And if it was, $40 per hundredweight and your hundredweight changed, the rate changed with it. And now you started this whole back end process that the customer experience is really terrible. And so probably by the time you've collected it, you've spent more administrative costs associated. And now you've got a customer that's upset because they just spent the same amount of time trying to figure out why the quote didn't match.
Oh, 1,000%. And like when I take a step back and we have to realize as an industry that we're very culpable for the problem we created or the environment we're in today. But what I love now is outside of the box thinkers like you or me that are here to help keep this moat around this beautiful industry with customers direct and the carriers and figure out how to make it more profitable so it has more staying power into the future. Right. And I think that's actually crucial for what we're doing. So kudos to you for all the work you're doing here with SOARs. And I think you're really just getting started. What do you, in your opinion, what are some of the other blind spots you see out there in the industry today, just in general?
I think I think carriers are getting more and more comfortable in understanding their costs. But I still think there's some blind spots in getting actual data back for carriers to really understand what their costs are and how they think about costs, because your costs over a 3-year period are different than your costs in a day, if that makes sense. And so there's a really strategic way how you have to think about that as a carrier, because one, you want to maximize revenue for today, but two, you can't become reliant on that revenue and then start in creating additional costs for something that was based on a view of a day. And so you can look at costs in a day, you can look at costs in a week, you can look at costs in a month, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, whatever the horizon period that you're looking at. I think there's a lot more that carriers can really, especially as carriers collecting their own data with regard to stops, with regard to all the different things. I think there's still going to be this change over that feeding that data back in can really help carriers get smarter about their costs. And if they get smarter about the costs, they're going to get more profitable, but also they're going to find where certain these transactional shipments fit better in their system that then benefits the shipper as well too. It goes back to, again, if we can find efficiencies and costs are eliminated, both parties will win in this case.
Yeah. So what I really love about this, and it's because I've seen every movie on every flight, whether I'm flying American, Delta, or Southwest at this point. So I'm rewatching some stuff. And one of the movies I rewatched was Moneyball, right? Yep. And what I love about what you're doing is when you really think about moving to more of a dynamic style pricing, you're really helping ensure that carrier increases their on base percentage or better, more accurate quotes more often to balance that network out. And I think that's a terrific way to look at it. Yeah. One of the other things that I know us at MyCarrier are really bullish about, and you kind of mentioned this earlier, is if you can get complete address info up front or more complete info, it only empowers what you're helping them do already, right? Oh. And so this is kind of me serving notice to anybody out there who's having like a platform experience or a front end for customers to book. I don't even care if it's your own carrier website. Workflow matters, right? Yes. And if on your website you have disparate systems and you're like, hey, you can get a quick quote, but you can't continue on. Oh, you can freeform a bill of lading, but you can't continue on. It just makes the bill of lading. And then, oh, by the way, you can come in here and just do a pickup call. Well, if you carriers are wondering why you don't get complete information or there's fragmentation or you can't get complete information until your P&D driver gets back, go look at the workflows at which the customer has to partake in to generate a shipment record, right? Yes. And so one of the things I'm bullish about is increasing the baseline of the complete address, origin, destination at time of quoting. I think it's a crime to quote off zip to zip, especially like with the tools the carriers have invested in. They have dimensionalizers at almost every terminal, damn sure every break bulk. They're all doing address validation on the front end, and they have outpaced the shipper community with the tools that they're leveraging to try to ensure that they're getting the correct revenue for the correct shipment they picked up.
Yeah, I think there's two things on that. One is for a shipper, let's say, to me, I'll call it a weakness of dynamic pricing or transactional pricing, is you don't know how that shipment interacts with other things. For example, I don't know if I'm going to pick up 1 or 2 shipments for you today. If you're not, and so I will say this, next steps forward in transactional pricing to me is booking windows stop from being 7 day, 10 days for a lot of carriers have, and it's booking a shipment. What day are you shipping? And maybe it's going to go to 5 days, maybe it goes to 3, but ultimately it's about to really get precise. When am I picking that shipment up? And am I picking up another shipment? Because that then changes my cost to you, which then changes my price that I want to pass along to you. So one, that's the benefit of it. Two, the flip side, what if it's going to, let's say it's going to a location that most carriers typically have multiple deliveries. Maybe they have consolidated deliveries. It's going to a Walmart DC. It's going to an Amazon FC or something similar to that. And that they can pick up, that they view, okay, I know my delivery costs are going to be a little bit less on this shipment than what it would be projected to be a single shipment delivery.
Yeah.
The flip side of that is if shippers really want to get to quote matching invoice, they've got to provide all the information. If you give the address, carriers now have the ability to know, is that a residential? Is that a restricted delivery? Is it, a high surcharge delivery area? All that can be on the quote at the front end, And so the zip code helps in some of that, but the address also matters in all those pages. And so getting that in the front end for a carrier to be able to price and quote is a key. And again, the carriers are getting really good at this. You may get a better quote, but your invoice is also going to match with what you shipped.
And this is something when I work with shippers, I don't care about quota cost. Quota cost means nothing. What did you end up paying the carrier? Because that is what matters. What the invoiced price is, because we all know freight, for the most part, is a pass-through cost.
Yes.
And so if you get burned on that invoice, right, you're not getting that money back. I'm not going to Danny and going, hey, dude, I delivered a sauna to your house. I ended up bringing it inside, and I didn't know about that. You owe me another $120.
Yeah.
Terrible customer experience. Nobody's going to do that.
Right.
Plus the cojones it takes to make that call. So I do love that going on. One of the things that obviously rattled the industry, and we saw this happen, but actually before we get to that, I do have one more question on the dynamic pricing. Sorry, I have ADD brain. Like, one of the things you just mentioned, right? When a truck bumps your dock for a shipper pickup, your cost, whether you're picking up one shipment or 10, as far as getting there to pick up the shipment, what are you seeing with carriers, maybe on the dynamic front, or trying to get to what I call like incentivizing the shipper to give them multiple bill pickups that day by rate of dynamically adjusting the rate. So they don't just get one and then they have to give them a single shipment fee. How do I ensure if that customer is booking 6 or 7 that day, I'm getting 3 to increase route density, thereby reducing costs a lot? Because not all shippers understand that that's probably a better way to engage with your carrier, right? Is to leverage that and help them reduce their costs.
So I'll tell you what I'm seeing today. I think carriers are taking on themselves trying to anticipate when they will get a multiple pickup, if that makes sense. So that could be past behavior of a customer. It could be, different things to be able to do that. What happens, though, is if they don't get the multiple pickups, the shipment's not going to operate the way it wanted to. Ultimately, it'll wrap itself back around to the customer, and the customer's not going to get the benefit of it. So I think that's kind of happening today, is it takes a predictive type model to say what you think is going to happen. Yeah. Ultimately, I think it goes back to this booking. If in a transactional world, truly to book a shipment, in a lot of cases now, some carriers may not know they're getting the transactional shipment until it was picked up and it gets billed that night, and the quote ID matches the quote, and they go, oh, we got that shipment, type deal. So I think as we get more of this, and I think, again, I'm pushing my carrier here, but to me, it's just been a great tool for the SMBs to do. Book the shipment, let the carrier know about it, and that way it flows through. The carriers have visibility to it. And then the more that they have that, the carriers can then start building around the ability to do multiple shipments. So they know I've already got one shipment there.
Yeah, I think, and this is a message for the shippers out there that may be listening is, and I knew how this went as a shipper. I've been one before. But I think one of the bad habits you can get into is not dispatching in real time once the order's picked, packed, and pulled. And a lot of them go, well, I might have another shipment for this carrier. I don't want the driver coming in early, so I'm going to hold and wait until like 3 p.m. Now what you've really done is put the service for your freight back against the wall, right? And now you're hoping that customer or that carrier has enough space on the truck to fit everything in. Now you have to scramble. Like, believe me, carriers want this information early and complete as much as possible, which is why we lead the charge on e-bill latings with complete commodity information, density, cube, everything, because I think is vitally important for the success of the LTL, not only P&D operation, but the line haul operation.
Yeah.
So like, I think that's a tough one where a lot of shippers need to work on what I'll call behavioral changes. But like you said, I think a platform or technology is one of the best ways to encourage positive behavioral change without asking the customer to really displace a lot of people, process, and technology like change management, in my opinion.
No, I think the focus that you've had on workflow and making it a part of what the SMB is doing, it's not an extra step for them at that point. It's just part of what they go through to be able to do it. And then again, all of that, all the work that you've done there lowers the cost for the carrier. And so ultimately the shipper wins because they've done those type things. They're going to get a return on that workflow that they work through and go through, and whether it's whether it's through MyCarrier or someone else, they get the benefit back on the back end of this. Yeah,
I just see too many times where the shipper wants to beat up the carrier for like a discount point, or so and so gives me a 92%, you're only an 88%, and it's like, well, listen. Have you slowed down and tried to understand where you can be better at and where you can drive more value to the carrier? Or is that just, I think we've trained the customer to a lesser degree to think that way. And I think there's a change coming in the marketplace to normalize that. And I think the work I'm doing and you're doing is going to help get us there.
Yeah, agree.
So, all right, we'll go back to this. That's all I got on that side of the fence. There was obviously big news that dropped. I think it was the Amazon announcement yesterday, or was it the day before?
I think it was a little bit before. It was last week, I think. Yeah. Last week or so.
Anyway, markets responded. You saw, dips in share prices with other publicly traded companies. And I think whenever Amazon announces they're getting into a space, whether like when they, I was at Cubics when they bought Whole Foods and we had just landed that contract and there was big shakeup there. And you're like, holy smokes, now they're getting into the grocery vertical, right? Yeah. And you see everything they attack, they end up winning. They might not figure it out initially. It might take them some time. But I think a lot of people freaked out like, oh man, it's going to put carriers out of business and it's going to cause all this, pricing wars that are going to happen, and Amazon can afford to lose money, more than anybody else. And it's like, well, they're still a business and they still want to be somewhat profitable and not lose money forever. But when I unpack that, like it's a lot of purchase trans and asset light models. And I'm curious, like, how they're really going to get into LTL and what your kind of take is that. I've seen all kind of crazy stuff from, they're going to go buy this carrier or buy that carrier, and it's going to cause other carriers to go into M&A acquisition mode. And I'm like, whoa, hold your horses here.
Yeah, I probably think a lot of kind of the same thoughts here on this. Obviously, there's more to learn, right? Exactly what their intentions and what they're going to do, what they actually have compared, because you read through, it's to me, it was still fairly vague about exactly what the service is they're providing. So I'll give you a short term and a long term. My long term part about this, it's hard to bet against Amazon, right? They have money. They tend to want to be able to be a loss leader to get to the point where they want to be in certain things. So they've done even from my past experience, they do a really good job of letting someone create something, they learn from it, and they go replicate it and try to do it at a lower cost than what was going on. Whether that's, supply chain, different supply chain optimizations, different ways to move freight or something else. So they're built to try to replicate and then improve on things to do that. So long term, there's obviously some risk here, type deal. Short term, I'm with you. It just seems like it's a very much an asset light LTL model. And so there's probably a place for that. I saw that they say LTL trained drivers, but I don't know that they're their drivers that I understand it to be. There is still a lot about the driver salesman, type deal. You hear a lot of carriers talk about that. That driver has a relationship with a lot of these customers, type deal. And so
it's your best sales asset. And that if you're a seller on the street and you got a good driver, that saves you accounts despite some like tomfoolery or mistakes happening within that account. So
I just think that lack of personalization relationships in some of the key touch points, and then relying on purchase transportation, if that's what they're going to be doing on this, it seems like it's going to be more painful to shippers in the short run than it's going to be beneficial. But again, long run, it's hard to bet against them.
Yeah. Now, I will say, I think one of the benefits that will come out of, we'll call this kind of market scare with them entering, is I think it's going to force the current LTL carriers to look at outwardly facing technology, what they give to the customers, and an overall better customer experience when it comes to exposing more tracking and visibility.
Yes.
Like if we're honest today, the carriers have the technology today to expose per stop where that truck is, both on pickup and delivery. And you know damn well Amazon is going to head down that path. So I think one of the things that can be a great benefit out of this is leveraging technology you have today. And I want to see an arms race with this to have a much better experience. Like I'll give kudos to A. Dewey Pyle, who's probably had this delivery and stop listing within their API calls for years now. And there might be other carriers that do that. They just come to mind for me.
Right.
I'm like, why is not everybody doing this? Right. And I think Estes has some visibility with that on their website now, but like as APIs become first-class citizens, it can't just exist on your website. That has to be furnished to every platform out there for a better overall experience, because I know that I will pay slightly more money for convenience, and I know the market will as a whole.
Yeah, I think you're on to me, a key point with what Amazon's kind of DNA is. They're willing to invest to create a better customer experience. And the other piece, they're willing to take a risk and force their customer to change a little bit to get that customer experience, if that makes sense. And so I would say LTLs are not that way. All the things that we're talking about with regard to, this visibility, even the front end of this, the legacy, NMFC rate basis discounts, it's not a this year like, oh, this is the shippers don't like this.
Yeah.
That's been out there for 20 or 30 years, but carriers are very afraid to step forward and be the one to push that change. I think it was, if we go back maybe 7-10 years ago, there was a big talk out of NFC, different pieces, and there's been some change in NFC with more density-based items, but there was a push then that someone's going to go out and change this completely. No carrier is going to do that. They don't want to risk their business to be able to do it, but they're not. Now, Amazon, they're different. They have a different mindset. They are willing to make a change, especially if they see the other side that creates a better customer experience, but also provides efficiency to them.
Yeah, and I think the most exciting thing about this for me is like, I don't think it's been since like 1985 when Conway emerged, where a real net new LTL carrier came into the game. Now, I'm not saying Amazon, as it sits today with their announcement, is a true net new player. They already had existing infrastructure, but they seem to be eager to add this middle mile modality to better service the customer as they get into, larger freight continues to enter the e-com world, right? I buy saunas at home. I buy appliances at home that get delivered to my door, and that stuff trickles into the LTL network. And I think they're looking at that going, we're the ultimate marketplace. Why don't we add our killer delivery service like you see with Parcel into the LTL space?
No, I agree with it. I think so I think there'll be a little difference too when they get out, and it's different from, what they've seen of LTL is their own LTL, really. I mean, that's probably what their mindset, and they develop things from. Well, a delivery to Amazon is not the same as a delivery to, a residence, type, or a very small shipper that doesn't have a dock, or, a residence that is 50 miles out and on a dirt road, and you're taking a semi down that dirt road to be able to try to deliver to that piece of it. So there's going to be different parts that come about to them, the nuances that they're going to have to learn from.
Yeah, and I don't see the Amazon LTL train driver pulling up going, cool, I need to get in and out, stops per hour increase, pushes the pallet off, takes a picture with a smartphone, here's your delivery, see you later, right? There's much more nuances to the LTL side, which is, quite frankly, why there's been a moat around this industry for so long, because it's such a hard industry to get into, and it's not like it's hyper profitable. When you look at ORs and you're going, like, outside finance guys are like, what? We're celebrating 20 cents on the dollar. And you're like, hell yeah, that's like killer, man. And that doesn't count the reinvestment back in for equipment and everything else that they've got to do. That's 20 cents before that. So yeah. There's a lot more to this than that. So I think the announcement was cool. I think it's going to increase competition in the marketplace. I have been a firm believer that LTL, both on the 3PL intermediary side and even the asset side to a lesser extent, is probably ripe for some level of consolidation, right? With more M&A acquisitions. You saw Knight Swift get into the game, the preeminent, truckload asset provider, going out there and, obtaining AAA Cooper, who's been on an M&A warpath. Yeah. I think you're going to continue to see some more of that, but maybe not as aggressive as what some of the kind of analysts have been calling out after this announcement was made.
Yeah, to me, it's still hard to cobble together a nationwide network, right?
Yeah.
If there is definitely some risk associated with that. Complementing by adding regionals and putting it under an umbrella to be able to do that. That's, I'm not saying that's easy, but that's to me a shorter step than if you're trying to combine networks and change the operations to be able to do things. So that's what with Amazon and all this acquiring a carrier. So if they really have infrastructure, they're going to go buy other infrastructure. What does that mean? Yeah. And so that's where it's be interesting to learn more. Does Amazon really have cross docks, or do they have warehouses? What do they have that's truly that fits what LTL carriers need to have to operate in a network?
Well, and I know they have cross docks. They're moving the parcel. They have the warehouses. They probably have a lot of shared space. But this, bringing in something like a break bulk center in Dallas that's 400 doors and has freight moving everywhere. You're going to have to make incremental steps to get there. And like you said, I wouldn't bet against them. No. But what I would do is start strategically planning ahead. And I think one thing that's been tough for LTL carriers is we're so caught up in winning the day that sometimes it's hard to focus on 1 year, 2 year, 3 year outlook. I think that's something that, Old Dominion's been phenomenal is ensuring that their investment in infrastructure is outpacing the market. And you'll see them do that where they know a service center, they're the only carrier here in the Valley that has 2 service centers. They have an East Valley service center and a central one, right? Now all the freight still goes there just like California does, right? Where everything's going to Rialto or Fontana, but they're ahead of the curve for that.
Yes.
So they've done a phenomenal job there. I just think it's going to push carriers in a better direction with more competition in the marketplace, and I'm here for it.
Yep, I agree.
So, well, shoot, Danny, it was awesome having you on. I think we chopped it up almost 40 minutes here. If there's any words of wisdom or anything you want to leave us with for SOARS, or plug yourself and how carriers could get connected with you and continue to work with you, have at it, man.
Sure. No, glad to be on the show. Glad to talk to you again. I think these conversations help move the industry forward, which is a big piece of what we're trying to do. Mm-hmm. Yes, we're working with carriers on whether it be transactional, dynamic pricing, different pieces, but we also kind of have the advisors that we talk about is a group that can really advance the industry beyond what we've been today. And so we're excited about being to do that. But, if anyone wants to look into more of what we're doing, just go to sourcepricing.com, SORSPRICING.com. There's some things there. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or anything else. We're excited to keep having conversations. It's been our team has been really excited about just the freedom kind of coming in a startup and working out, stepping out of corporate office has been, our team's talked about it. It's just, it's really fun and been really creative for them to start from scratch, have access to the brand new tech stack, new tools. Every day our models are changing because we're reaching out and learning about different products and building a new product that works for the carriers. And so, I've said this, we talk to carriers, our models right now are as dumb as they're ever going to be. They learn every day, and so that's a pretty exciting place to be.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you this, as a friend and a peer in the industry, I'm so glad that beautiful mind of yours got out of the corporate Fortune 500 and is let loose in the entrepreneurial space, because I love it. I know it's tough for me, like somebody that we'll call the fiber of my fabric might be cut from a different cloth. I like to move fast. I like to try things. If I fail, do it differently. And I think that's hard for me to do confined in like a corporate environment. So I've absolutely fallen in love with the kind of LTL adjacent freight tech space.
Yes, it's been really meet a lot of new people, it's been great. It's been a great experience, not just for the team, but I think we're making progress. We're growing pretty fast, and it's, I think we can make some changes to the industry as we go forward here.
Amen. Well, great. Danny, again, thanks for coming on. I wish you the best of luck with SOARS. Can't wait to have you back on here maybe in like 6 months and unpack what's next and what we're seeing change. So thanks for coming on and hanging out with me, man.
Appreciate it. Thanks.